There are stories about the British royal family that begin with a photograph, a public statement, or an official announcement. And then there are stories that begin with something much quieter, a property, a document, and a question about who actually has the right to control it. One recent royal claim has suggested that Prince Edward became involved in a dramatic dispute surrounding Windsor Lodge, a dispute allegedly involving Queen Camilla, Lady Louise Windsor, and even Prince William. According to the circulating story, what began as a disagreement over one royal residence eventually became something much bigger, a battle over family property, private collections, and the balance of power inside the House of Windsor. But there is an important problem. The central events described in this story have not been independently confirmed by credible reporting. So tonight, rather than simply repeating the most dramatic version of the claim, we're going to examine the story itself, what it alleges, why it sounds believable, and where the mystery begins. Because sometimes the most interesting part of a royal story isn't what happened, it's figuring out what actually can be proven. The story begins late at night. According to the claim, a private vehicle allegedly left Bagshot Park and headed toward the Windsor area, carrying an official-looking envelope. Inside, supposedly, was a legal notice connected to Windsor Lodge. The allegation was extraordinary. Queen Camilla was supposedly being given a limited amount of time to remove personal belongings from the property, and the person allegedly behind the move was Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. That would already be an astonishing development. But the story goes much further. It claims Edward's legal advisors had spent months examining old property records and had uncovered an obscure document dating back to the royal family's arrangements in the 20th century. The document, according to the allegation, gave a particular branch of the family special rights over the property. And that supposed document became the foundation for everything that followed. This is where the story becomes difficult to separate from fiction. The narration describes an old royal covenant, private trusts, hereditary rights, and constitutional protections. Those phrases sound impressive. They sound like the language of a serious legal investigation. But language alone is not evidence. And one of the first warning signs is the way the alleged historical document is described. The story repeatedly refers to a supposed George V/6 connection. But George V and George VI were two different monarchs. George V reigned until 1936. George VI succeeded him and reigned until 1952. That distinction matters when a story claims to be based on an important historical legal document. If the underlying document were genuine, its exact date, wording, legal status, archival location, and chain of ownership would be critical. Yet the story doesn't provide those things. Instead, it gives the audience something much easier to visualize: a mysterious document, an old seal, a legal team, a royal property, and a deadline. That's powerful storytelling. But it is not the same thing as verification. Then comes the next dramatic moment. The story claims that Camilla's vehicle arrived at the property the following morning. According to the allegation, security personnel refused to open the gates. Camilla supposedly demanded to see the authorization. Her staff allegedly attempted to contact Buckingham Palace, and the story says those efforts was unsuccessful because King Charles was away at Sandringham. This part of the narrative is particularly clever, because there is a real-world fact sitting underneath the fictional-looking storyline. King Charles has publicly dealt with cancer treatment. That makes the idea of him being temporarily away from London sound plausible. But there's a major difference between saying, King Charles has undergone medical treatment, and saying, Edward deliberately timed a secret eviction for a period when Charles could not intervene. The first is a factual claim that can be independently reported. The second requires evidence, and the story doesn't provide convincing evidence for it. Then another name enters the center of the controversy: Lady Louise Windsor. The allegation claims that the property wasn't simply being reclaimed, it was allegedly being transferred to Edward's daughter. And suddenly, what appeared to be a dispute between adults became a question about the next generation of the royal family. This is another reason the story feels so convincing. Lady Louise is a real member of the royal family. Her connection with equestrian activities and carriage driving is also real. So when the story connects her interests to a supposed Windsor property, the details appear to fit together. But a detail being plausible does not make the larger story true. That's an important lesson when following royal stories online. A fabricated story doesn't necessarily need to invent everything. It can take 10 real facts and place one completely unverified event between them. The result can sound remarkably authentic, and that's exactly what appears to be happening here. The alleged Windsor Lodge dispute then becomes even larger. The story claims that Prince William had been quietly supporting Edward. According to the allegation, the two brothers had supposedly been discussing the long-term control of royal properties and historical collections. A supposed private meeting in 2024 is mentioned. The story suggests that the younger generation of royals wanted to protect certain properties from centralized control. Again, it sounds like constitutional history. But where is the documentation? Where is the official statement? Where is the credible reporting? Where is the actual legal document? Those are the questions that matter. And so far, the story doesn't provide satisfactory answers. Then comes perhaps the most dramatic claim of all. The alleged dispute supposedly wasn't limited to the building. Camilla's side was said to be concerned about artwork, personal archives, and historical objects inside the property. The story claims lawyers argued over whether these objects were personal possessions or fixtures belonging to the estate. That sounds like exactly the kind of complicated legal battle that could happen around a historic property. But once again, the distinction between possible and proven becomes crucial. Royal residences can contain extremely valuable historical objects. Ownership of royal artworks and personal gifts can genuinely be complicated. But there is no credible confirmation that this particular legal battle between Camilla and Edward occurred in the way described. And then the story reaches its climax. King Charles allegedly learns about the dispute. His advisors supposedly warn him that challenging the old covenant could expose broader questions about royal property arrangements. According to the story, Charles eventually decides not to fight. Instead, he supposedly accepts the new arrangement involving Lady Louise. That ending serves an important storytelling purpose. It transforms the story from a simple family disagreement into a historical turning point. The monarch supposedly loses control. The younger generation supposedly gains independence. William supposedly supports Edward. Louise supposedly becomes the symbol of a new royal era, and Camilla supposedly loses more than a residence. She loses influence. It's a very clean narrative, almost too clean. Real royal institutions rarely work that neatly, and that's another reason to treat this story cautiously. The final section of the claim describes a completely transformed Windsor. Security supposedly changes, property administration supposedly shifts, staff allegedly receive new instructions, William allegedly visits Louise. And the story concludes that the old centralized system of royal authority has effectively been broken. It's a dramatic ending, but once again the evidence doesn't match the size of the claim. If such a fundamental change had genuinely taken place inside the administration of Windsor properties, it would be reasonable to expect substantial documentation and reporting. Instead, the story relies heavily on unnamed insiders, alleged legal papers, supposed private conversations, and highly specific scenes that readers cannot independently verify. That doesn't prove that every detail is false, but it means we should not present the story as established fact. So what can we actually take away from all of this? First, Prince Edward is real. He is the Duke of Edinburgh. Bagshot Park is a real royal residence associated with Edward and his family. Lady Louise is real. Her interest in carriage driving is real. King Charles's medical treatment is real. And the British royal family's property arrangements are genuinely complicated. Those are the pieces of reality that make the story feel convincing. But the central allegation, that Edward legally evicted Queen Camilla from Windsor Lodge using a secret wartime covenant and then transferred the property to Lady Louise, remains unverified. And that changes the way the entire story should be understood. It may be a fictionalized royal drama. It may be speculative storytelling built from real royal facts. It may be an exaggerated version of real discussions about royal properties. But until credible evidence appears, it should not be described as confirmed breaking news. And perhaps that's the most interesting mystery here, not whether a dramatic royal eviction happened exactly as described, but why stories like this are so effective. Because they don't sound completely imaginary. They use real names, real buildings, real historical periods, real family relationships, real health developments, and then they place an extraordinary allegation in the middle. The listener recognizes enough truth to accept the rest. That's what makes this kind of royal story so powerful and so easy to misunderstand. For now, the alleged Windsor Lodge confrontation remains a story that requires verification, not a confirmed royal event. But if genuine legal documents, official records, or credible reporting ever emerge, the implications would be enormous. Because then the question wouldn't simply be whether Camilla lost access to a house. It would be about something much larger. Who really controls the royal family's historic properties? How much authority does the monarch actually have over every residence connected to the crown? And how much independence will the younger generation of royals have as the institution moves toward its next era? Those questions are real. The alleged eviction, however, is not currently established as fact. And sometimes, in the world of royal stories, the line between a genuine palace development and a perfectly constructed piece of fiction is exactly where the real mystery begins.